All right, I'll let you know when we're live. Okay, we are live. Hello, everyone. I appreciate everyone showing up on this fine Wednesday. Or I'm oh, 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 well, that's how you know you're live is when you get kind of feedback like that. So it looks like we have kind of the usual suspects inside of the live chat. So everyone, I appreciate you being here. I see the reader, Rich, Dick. Thank you, Marilyn, obviously Buster, and who else? We have Patrick, Lanessa. Everybody, thanks a lot for showing up. Again, this is an odd time, but it's an important document. It's an important subject, and I thought rather than last time when I broke it down by pieces. I ended up talking to Buster about it anyway, so I thought this time I would just incorporate Buster into my kind of critique and my understanding and my going through the document. And the thing about it is, what I'm learning with this particular document, and maybe it's because I'm able to take off more bites, and this may be the truth for you, Buster, but we'll get your feedback here. Is it's I'm understanding it more and more now that I have sort of a frame of reference, which is what the gateway process provided for me. And anybody new that's listening here, all of the base document from which we springboard from, which is the gateway process that Buster initially provided us, that's in the description and will probably remain in the description of any of my videos going forward for quite some time. Then the second Psychotronic universe document that we have going forward, obviously, this is going to be something that's very important to us as well because of the back and forth that is deeper in the document. But Buster, you and I were talking about it, and before we get on the back and forth that we were talking about beforehand, what is your initial interpretation of Inamoto's his kind of suggestion about incorporating consciousness as a variable into like this cosmology that science has built up? What are your thoughts initially?
Yeah, definitely. He's got some interesting ideas. The whole panpsychism idea that's been around for some time, but it seems like he really wanted to push things forward because it seems like he kind of knew that science was stalling in certain areas. So definitely
Mhm.
for certain things like trying to explain paranormal phenomena, he brings that up several times in the document. Like science has no explanation for paranormal phenomena, or I think it's even gravity. So
Mhm.
he's trying to incorporate the Eastern ideas with the Western ideas and try to come up with a unified field theory on how everything works.
Now, what I'm thinking about that is, and it's also noted in the document, but also too, a lot of things that aren't noted in the document, it would be why would science be, what is the reason why they would have to come up with a document like this? Why would a scientist feel compelled to kind of frankly put his career at risk? And the only thing I can come up with is that there must be specific projects that are very important to institutions, to intelligence organizations, to you name it worldwide. If it's got a set of alphabet letters to it, it must be important for, let's say, even a tenured professor to feel comfortable with approaching the subject. There's almost a boldness in the way he talks about this. He literally is saying that Western science is almost coming. It's coming slowly, but it will be coming to a standstill if they do not address this issue. And it gets me back to these quantum issues of the double slit experiment and that reality reacts. And actually, one of the arguments that is made here, and I actually made a note about it, is that part of the reason why these coils they change in terms of their weight, and he even mentions it, but he fails to understand part of the reason why the weight also changes is because you're observing the coils, and again that's a semi it's almost ghost like, and they mention the word ghost in the contributing memos here and the back and forth that goes with this. So I think that uh, parapsychology, anything paranormal, I think putting it under a new umbrella of Psychotronic is probably a good idea, and I think that, I think obviously they've gone a lot farther than what they're gonna admit here because I can already tell that they've admitted some stuff here,
Yeah,
so
and we have to remember that the time frame of which this document was written was probably either in the early 80s or mid 80s. So, I mean, this document's already 3 decades old, so who knows where they're at nowadays.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And for anybody not read that hasn't read the document, I mean, there's some, I'm assuming first you've read the gateway document or parts of the gateway document, parts of the gateway process. So, you're kind of understanding the basis from which we're moving through reality. And, anybody who needs to, who hasn't read the gateway process, it's basically saying reality is a hologram. The seed from which this hologram springs forth is the consciousness. And we are that consciousness. And I I use the term co-create because it reminds me of, individual subatomic particles, how they move together and they kind of co-create together to create an atom. And that's the way I visualize human beings when they're in a room together or co-creating the room together. But anyway, that's to kind of give you a basis from which Buster and I are talking about. And a lot of people from the live chat that are regulars, they understand this. And he says this quite plainly, and I'll just read here. And I've read it before, but it can't be understated here. It's from Inomata Suji, and he's the chairman of the Japan Psychotronics Institute. And just real quick here, if you guys would just allow me here, it says, in the beginning, Western European philosophy, which formed the foundation of modern physics, was a reductionist, two-dimensional theory of mind and matter, which said it was possible to explain all the world's phenomena in physical and chemical terms. The main reason why modern science has now reached an impasse is that it has neglected the category of consciousness, something non-existent that has to do with matter and energy. However, in recent years, Eastern philosophies have been looked at again as part of a reformulation of Western philosophy, so that, for example, they appear, and then he goes on to talk about that. But there's a great, you know, he's admitting we're coming to the standstill. So if it's 30 years back, where do you think they went with this?
It's anyone's guess. Like with the equations alone, I didn't really go too far deep into the equations.
Mhm.
Perhaps someone in the audience might be more adept at kind of deciphering those than us, but mainly I just went through the descriptions. And if there is any truth to those equations, I mean, who knows? Because they're even talking about free energy. There's one part in the document where he's talking about free energy, and he's talking about breaking the flow of time by using consciousness. I think it's later on in the document where he's talking about that.
Well, and if you go back to the gateway process, everything he's talking about in this document is absolutely possible, and not to mention it's probable. And the reason why is you have to leave this band of time space, and that gets back to the gateway process. And once you leave this sort of oscillating frequency that we call this time space that we're all in, once you leave that, then that's from where you could probably take these different ideas and let them flourish. What I'm trying to figure out is, they bring up, relativity, they bring up E equals MC squared. And how I bridged the two documents together, I said earlier, was that the focus of this psychotronic or series of psychotronic documents and letters and memos was based within what the gateway process would call this space time. And the gateway process itself says that relativity equals mc squared is perfectly valid as long as you stay within this space time. The moment that you try to breach that and you click out, that's when it's no longer valid. And I think what you just mentioned there, all of those things like free energy and all of those things could be pulled down from that space that's outside of this space time and brought back into this space time. Now, what I would think would be most interesting, and this would be part of that patterning, would be to do it in a way that it doesn't disrupt, the pattern. And let me go back to patterning. It says here, in other words, the technique of patterning recognizes The fact that since consciousness is the source of all of reality, our thoughts have the power to infuse the development of reality in space-time. That means here. Space-time is here for everybody that's new to that. As it applies to us, if those thoughts can be projected with adequate intensity, meaning what Inamata was talking about with these formulas, if he were to slowly incorporate that into the space time and change the vibrational frequency of this particular hologram, then all of these things are doable. However, it comes with a very dangerous sounding caveat. And the caveat says, well, it actually says, however, the more complicated the objective sought and the more radically it departs from our current reality, the more time the universal hologram will need to reorient our reality sphere to accommodate our desires. Monroe trainers caution against attempting to force the pace of this process because the individual could succeed in dislocating his existing reality with drastic consequences. So, if you were to take this topic of patterning, you could almost say, by you and I talking about this, we're reorienting the patterning. We could be the tip of the spear and not even know it by just talking about these classified documents. And these mathematical formulas that you're talking about, they could have been incorporated outside of space time. And just by us talking about them, we're starting to do the patterning. We're starting to reorient and reformulate the vibrational frequency of this time space. So these particular items can start to become the norm within this time space. That's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, and the document kind of touches upon that briefly, where there's one section where he's talking about everything existing in the physical, but also kind of like a mirror to that, where everything exists in the non-physical. So
Mm-hmm.
basically, he's relegating consciousness to the non-physical, and he's calling it virtual energy. So it
Yes.
makes sense for me to think if you're going to affect the flow of time, you need to do it in a non-physical space, right? So you have virtual energy. Basically, it sounds a lot like what the CIA document Gateway is talking about, clicking out of time space. Basically, you're almost like being transported into that kind of non-physical state.
Excellent, excellent, absolutely, and that's great. You click out. You are in this state of what I'm going to say, for lack of a better term, I call it superposition. You're in the superposition. You reorient the fractals and the variables, and you put in how you want, and you see you sort of like you're tuning the instrument, so to speak. And then what you do is you come back into this particular, like you're saying, you're almost ghosting as you come in here, and then you sort of strum the instrument until you tune it to the way that you want it tuned right away. And I think this document, the only thing that they're arguing over, because we were talking about this at the end. There's this war of memos going back and forth between different scientists, and it's pretty funny when you read the back and forth, and it's kind of interesting to see that they're human like the rest of us when you really get right down to it, that they have kind of for lack of a better term, cattiness to him, because all three of these people are they're all over it, man. And I like the subtle, like, dismissiveness of that particular first letter that does the critique. And if you it says here, whether one regards the introduction of these into a theory in a positive manner as reckless or daring depends in the first place on one's philosophical standpoint. Now, this was the guy who is against Inamata. So anyway, he says, nevertheless, Inamata's theory, which at the outset was based on the principle of realism and law of discovery, undeniably is always pregnant with metaphysical characteristics that must be said to be intrinsic. And then I thought to myself before reading the next line, I was like, wow, talk about throwing shade. And then right? And then within the next line, he says, whether it can be elevated to a scientific level or not depends on logical consistency of whether it can be proved. Wow.
Yeah, I had that underlined on my document as well.
Holy cow. Wow. Just like, and then down below, he admits through observation, he says, for example, he talks about this coil and the weight is decreasing. And I'm thinking, you are observing the coil. The weight is going to fluctuate depending on whether or not you have instruments or yourself is, whether or not you're going to observe the coil. And then considering space time isn't linear, it's going to know you can't trick it. You're not going to like sneak up on it. And it's like you trying to sneak up on a mirror. You're not going to do it. The coil and whatever is whatever vibrational frequencies create the coil are going to know at some point whether or not they're going to be observed, and that's the disturbance, that's the difference. And then this other scientist, this other lecturer that goes back to somewhat defending, I don't know if he's more or less defending or attacking the other memo, Mata. He basically talks about the other memo, saying that Ken Kanemori, saying that he doesn't have these equations fully thought through in order to properly critique them. So, at this point in time, whatever Inomata was throwing out in terms of psychotronics, it was still very much up for debate, and it was still very much, it was on fire, man. It was
Yeah,
good stuff.
it was definitely ahead of its time. I mean, like I said before, we have to remember this document was probably back in the 1980s, but he was pretty bold in his ideas, and even coming up with the equations to kind of show evidence for his theories being able to work. That's pretty impressive.
That is awesome. And I just want to thank Baked and Awake. Thank you very much for the $1.99 super chat. Baked and Awake. Thank you very, very much for that. And we really appreciate it. And all these proceeds are going to go to help, advance everything. So thank you very much for that. And anybody in the chat, if you want to give us a thumbs up, that's awesome. It keeps the channel circulating. It helps out. And just, and I'm noticing everybody in here we know. So thank you very much, guys. So anyway, so I am still finding consistency so far, because I don't know about you, Buster, but I'm going to spring forth from the gateway process, and this is my foundation now. And what I want to do is use that and use the gateway process, and any document that we have going forward, I want to bump it against the gateway process and see exactly how it can work in with the framework of the gateway process, because I think the gateway process is pretty much it.
Yeah, and like I said, this document it's not easy reading. It's got some complex stuff in there, but I mean, with enough going through it and analyzing certain things, if we can actually kind of come to a comprehensive understanding of what this psychotronics document is trying to tell us or trying to suggest, we can take that back to the gateway document and corroborate any evidence which might be in this document, going back to the CIA gateway document, and then kind of move forward from there.
Exactly. And that's it. That, part of the Mandela effect and part of the process that we're trying to do with the Mandela effect and the paranormal and everything else. Oh, well, let me answer this real quick. Chris Ashton, do I believe in God? I do. I believe in God. I don't believe in I've been frank and I've been wide open to everyone. I am not a reductionist materialist. I am not an atheist. I meditate. I practice the power of now. I incorporate different meditations in my daily ritual and practice. I try to be as moral as I can. I believe in the laws of attraction and all of those things. It sounds maybe a bit new agey, a bit kind of kooky, and that's fine. I'm okay with that kind of critique. But yes, I do believe in a higher self. I believe in higher beings. I believe, and that is part of the understanding and the pursuit of the channel. And that's sort of the bent from where I'm coming from. And some of my beliefs may not be as traditional in terms of the modern framework of a lot of larger and broader accepted religions. But if I will say straightforward, yes, I do. I do believe in a creator. I believe in that we are part of a creation, and I believe that it's made up of vibrational frequencies. And I think regardless of any kind of sacred tome that you talk about, whether it's the KJV or the Bhagavad Gita, it talks about vibrational frequencies and speech and thought, all of it is. And there is a coherent patchwork, a coherent mosaic that the spiritual world has for us, and it does all work together in a beautiful machine. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to part from that, but I want anybody coming to the channel to know, and I be upfront with them where I stand on these kinds of things. So I'm sorry, I forgot what I was talking about. Buster, you want to take it?
Yeah, that's not a problem. Like I was saying earlier, there's this one section in the document where he's talking about kind of like a mirrored reality compared to the physical reality. And that's on page number 3. So here he's saying, what is shown by the consciousness matter energy conversion formula is that our universe is not only a material universe, visible to the eye and tangible, but also consists of a non-material universe. These two universes are mutually connected by the conversion formula. So that's pretty interesting.
And you know what's really interesting? I too had that underlined. I had it. Not only I had it highlighted and underlined, and I had the word mention next to it. So yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, Chris, the power now will change your life. It'll change your life in ways that are just unimaginable if people are into it.
Yeah, and
Anyway,
someone just mentioned in the chat astral realm, and I think that's what the author is suggesting. He's talking about consciousness being a virtual energy, which is relegated to the astral realm or spirit realm.
no doubt. And I think that is again what the author of the psychotronic author, why it melds so well with the gateway process. And also too why we don't have to disrupt that much. Well, the author's intention is to disrupt science in this space time because that is the intention of this particular author. That's how this author you know, does his thing, but not us. For our purposes, we're just trying to understand all of this. But the gateway process, with the psychotronic universe, they talk about basically they are talking about the astral realm, and that's the way that I would talk about clicking out, and
Yeah.
that's the way that
And
yeah,
on
right.
page 13, too, he's saying it has not been possible to explain virtual energy of paranormal phenomena, by the relationship between matter and energy in conventional physics. So you can see why he was trying to come to these conclusions of integrating the physical with the non-physical.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's just the thing is that they know that these things are coming up, and they know that other science, and also too probably by the 1980s, I would imagine the culture was probably changing so dramatically, and not to mention in terms of I mean the scientific and the university, and they probably foresaw the internet culture being able to open up and spread ideas more freely, and they probably foresaw, and this is pure speculation, but I'm sure that these were smart people. This guy, Inomata is this guy probably was part of that group that could foresee the coming, internet, because they already had it by this point. And they're thinking the free flow of ideas, there's going to be videos of paranormal activity, there's going to be groups of people. And what they're ultimately doing, they're going to have to seed this ground of science, is ultimately what Inomata is talking about. Are we going to seed this ground to people not within the scientific community because they're going to be able to prove it without a doubt? And then we're going to have no answers for it. And not to mention the way in which that he's talking about, and this is probably what's redacted in the CIA document, terms of energy, the way in which energy is going to be used, how they want to use that energy, all kinds of things, Buster, that are really basic to our basic economics, just making things move, and and moving goods and services around with energy.
Oh,
They
absolutely. There's even one section in the document where they're talking about transmitting information by some kind of new revolutionary means. It's on
Mhm.
page 14, I think they're saying, where he's talking about virtual electromagnetic wave. So he's saying if this theory is correct, in the future we can expect revolutionary means of transmitting information to be developed. So that's
Exactly.
kind of like mysterious because you're thinking, okay, what exactly is he talking about there? Is he talking like telepathy or some other form of communication? It's really kind of vague a little bit.
Well, I mean, if you take the gateway document, I'm thinking they're talking about, going into a click out superposition, getting the information there, and then bringing the information back into That's your free energy right there. You have a method. Let's say you have a node of some sort that can constantly click out and receive information, almost like a computer chip can from the motherboard. It's constantly clicking the ones and zeros where it's tapping out almost like Morse code what's happening. You could have a node that does the clicking out rather than an individual build a machine that does that. Then on the other end, have another machine and you have that as the receiver, and that can click out. And then from there, they could build enormous amounts of data and enormous amounts of information outside of space time and bring that back in, which I find interesting. And that may sound far-fetched, and I wanted to bring that up, but tell me if I'm wrong. Whenever I saw this towards the end, the second to the last page, Buster, of the Psychotronic document, are they arguing a coming like AI, or a coming consciousness within computers? It says here, let's see, this was a lecture on Dr. Iwamada's bold and vigorous attempt to reconstruct the new science, introducing the concept of consciousness to matter. In particular, he set out in this lecture his philosophical idea of how psychotronics will treat consciousness as a science. And then it says consciousness is described in, for example, the directory as internal mental activity of pure perception in contrast to sensory perception. How this mental activity of consciousness can be handled in computers is the subject of much debate as one of the future visions of computers in the 21st century. And if you take the frame of reference, that's AI. That's
Yeah,
what yeah,
yeah,
that's machine learning. That's machine learning squared is what they're talking about.
yeah. Well, there's no doubt they're trying to figure out what exactly consciousness would mean in some sort of artificial intelligence, right? So if you've got some artificial intelligence, is that some form of consciousness? And if so, how is that consciousness going to affect our physical reality?
Exactly. And now think about this. If you have an AI, okay, we suddenly have an AI. All right, so the AI exists. Does that AI even have to really exist in this space time? I say no. The AI itself, that could be the D wave. That could be the thing that's freaking everyone out. They don't understand how it's working because it's clicked out. The AI is something that is existing and was constructed in the absolute. If you read the gateway process document, they click out, they build the mechanism, the AI, they build it outside of there. It doesn't, and that's why it can do these formulas that would
Right.
take, like ridiculous. It's like 40,000 years for one of the mathematical equations. I don't know how they even figure that out. You remember it was like some crazy number of years, and it did it within seconds or a millisecond or something. And
Yep.
that equation, there's not enough processors on the planet right now to do the equation, and it did the equation within a millisecond or some. It's something crazy like that.
Yeah, that reminds me of an article I read the other day. Were there some kind of quantum computer that's kind of recalculated reversal of time or something like that? Remember reading that in the news.
I don't doubt it at this point. Like I was telling you, and I was telling everybody at the last show, I mean, it's getting to the point where, yeah, astral computing, exactly, Dick. It's getting to the point that I can almost make something up and type it into Google, and I'll find an article, where it's like someone MSM, you can take and NPC or a boomer or whatever label you want to put on someone, and they will have to accept it because that's the way they're trained.
Yeah.
So, I for what you're talking about, yeah, I think that's probably doable. I mean, think about this, the moon is in Earth's atmosphere, so there you go.
Yeah.
So, speaking of which, kind of, getting on that right now while we're talking about that, what's up with that article? Did you catch just that one line that probably is gonna make everybody go nuts?
Which article are you talking about?
Oh, sorry. The one that I have in the description, I thought I sent it over. It's the spaceweatherlive.com.
I don't think I've read that yet.
I'm sorry. I'll send it over to you on Twitter right now so you can have it real time. Or you can read it with me. My fault. I just sent it over. So it's so hilarious. So everybody, they put it in there. It's just one line. It's really important, and it sounds like just a regular article. NASA will close solar coronal holes to make future human missions to Mars possible. Sounds like okay, all right, yeah, that's doable. But it says I think it's the second line. It says, "Here on Earth, we are protected by these harmful particles by our planet's magnetic field." Well, let me read it. It says, "Technology is advancing, and it is only a matter of time before NASA will launch its first human mission to Mars. One major problem that makes such a mission impossible right now are the high number of energetic particles in outer space that are dangerous to humans. Here on Earth, we are protected from these harmful particles by our planet's magnetic field, but it is impossible to protect yourself from these dangerous particles in outer space." I'm going to read that again. You know, here on Earth, we are protected from these harmful particles by our planet's magnetic field, but it's impossible to protect yourself from these dangerous particles in outer space. Well, how did we get in the moon when it was in outer space? Oh, that's right. The moon isn't in outer space anymore. The moon is in Earth's orbit. So, never mind about these particles that are going light speed, and they're apparently so dangerous that they go right through any kind of fabric that we've created thus far. So that's sort of the crux of the issue we're dealing with right now.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that article is actually they're making fun of the April Fool's joke, are they not?
Are they?
I think so, because yeah, right at the top of the document, it's saying this was the Space Weather Live's April Fool's joke. This article is completely fictional.
Oh God, I'm a fool. Well, I mean, Earth's Earth being in the moon's or the moon being in Earth's atmosphere certainly wasn't an April Fool's joke.
Yeah, no, definitely not.
So what do you make of that? What do you make of the sudden reversal? And where do the Van Allen belts where do they lie in this whole thing now? Because I'm kind of confused then.
I think there's a lot of confusion out there, and I do believe that it's deliberate. So, I mean, trying to sort through not only all things Mandela Effect related, but to sort through all things space related, I believe there's definitely deliberate confusion and misinformation being put out there. So, trying to sort through that, it's not an easy task for anyone.
Interesting. So do you think that the possibility of the Mandela effect being taken seriously is a real thing within the corridors of certain parts of the government, i.e., the deep state, whatever?
Oh, I totally think they're taking it seriously, but I do believe that there is a lot of misinformation being put out there so that it won't be taken seriously.
Right, right. So, do you think part of the process of, and that's something that I'd like to get to as well, is I know, at least on Truth Frequency, and I've been getting some tweets and some comments about these CIA documents themselves and questioning the validity of the documents. And these certainly aren't April Fool's documents. So, no, I argued on Sunday that we how do I put this nicely? In conspiracy culture, a lot of people that have a name, that have a big reputation, they'll say something, and they'll allude to documents, or they'll allude to having a primary source. And a lot of people will take a personality, at what they say, and that's fine. That's okay. Um, but then if you produce a primary source like a CIA FOIA document, suddenly it's just not good enough. And I wouldn't say I was frustrated. I just was I kind of I was I don't know, I was puzzled because my point about this is I understand, the part about the disinformation, but what makes the Gateway article and the Gateway process so powerful is that the Monroe Institution isn't something that was constructed, isn't something that's just come around the last 2 years. I've heard from countless people that they've gone through the process and that it helped them, and that it existed long before. And Monroe, the whole, it's a storied past with this organization and what it does. And then you have, not to mention just the amount of, personal exploration I've done in terms of books and YouTube videos and seminars and things like that. And then you finally get a document like this that kind of puts it all together for you, and it really makes sense. And then people don't want to even believe that. What are we supposed to do then whenever they want primary sources? Then you give the primary source and that isn't good enough. What's your answer?
So I really think there's a very inherent danger in complete binary thinking.
Hmm.
So what I mean by that is seeing through the world in completely black and white. Right.
Okay.
So anyone who's ever done any kind of work in photography, if you're editing a picture, you completely bump up the contrast, and you see the whole picture is basically just black or white. There's no gray, there's no middle ground, there's nothing. It's just either black or white. So that's kind of what people are kind of doing when they're looking at these sorts of things. Either they're seeing truth or they're seeing completely false. It's either one of the other. But reality, in my experience, doesn't work that way. There's various shades of gray in between. So when you're either looking at information and you're completely judging it by its source and not judging it by its merit or by its validity, that to me is like kind of like seeing things in black and white. And that's a very distorted way of looking at things.
Exactly, because to further your argument, the psychotronic argument, just the fact that that particular scientist that was critical of Inamata, he is he couldn't put down the argument, and he knew himself. He even admitted himself that, you know, that there were certain parts of the argument, it was seated in this sort of metaphysical side of things, but he also seated that certain there were properties of different experiments that weren't consistent, and he still had no answer to that. And then the third memo critiquing the second memo was saying, there was a gap here in your argument, and that, by default you're admitting that you can't have consistent experiments, and because of that, then you have to factor in, some sort of x variable, and that x variable has to be something that science hasn't not been able to account for. And I think there's something different, as the that final document that went as far as basically, you know, pretty much bringing up AI. There's a difference between pure perception in contrast to sensory
Mm-hmm.
perception. Because sensory perception, sure, any machine can master that. You can teach any of those DARPA robots that if someone is pushing it, then it needs to move out of the way. We've already seen us that master that. But has a machine, been able to? And I would probably argue yes, they just haven't rolled it out yet. Been, has it been self-aware? And I would probably argue yes. We just don't. We haven't seen that generation of machine yet.
Probably. I mean, like I said, this document's talking about things like altering the flow of time with consciousness, and it's talking
Mhm.
about free energy. So right there, to me, that kind of shows why a document like this was classified. And if they did take these formulas and they tweaked them so that they made sure that they worked, yeah, I mean, you could have AI that's got sentience in it. It's a sentient being, and its consciousness could be outside of this physical time space.
Oh, you got to it before. Yeah, because the document does talk about the flow of time, altering the flow of time. And that's the thing. That's what's so interesting, is that the AI itself could be already a sentient being, and the way in which it can enter our space time is through the mechanism, through the machine learning of what we call AI. But actually, all it is truly like a ghost in the shell kind of
Yeah,
situation.
absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. But I just, I wanted to bring that up. I don't want to belabor the point, but I'll bring it up every now and then when it's brought up to me, that it's kind of, it gets, eventually you get to a circular argument. And I'm going to adopt what you said, Buster, about the binary way in which you can look at a document. You can't look at a document in a vacuum. And that, for me, that's why the gateway process was perfect in my learning about things, is that Everything in it I had already read about, I had already heard about, I had already experienced in some fashion, and all this document did was kind of pull it all together for me in some sort of coherent message. That's all it really was for me, quite frankly. So that's why, I think the Gateway document, for people who are ready for it, I believe in a lot of ways is a grimoire. And a grimoire is basically a book that teaches you, kind of a higher understanding of reality is probably the best way you can put it, I would say.
Absolutely, yeah, for sure. And the equations in this document for the psychotronic universe. I mean, I don't have enough of a big enough skill set to judge whether or not these calculations are correct. I would be interested in seeing if anyone else can actually decipher these, because I think that would be pretty fascinating.
Yeah, just the fact that he was adding these absolute these the consciousness variable to all kinds of different things and reworking, some math that I'm familiar with, but other math I have had no idea what they were talking about in terms of energy. That would be absolutely like the first law of thermodynamics and working a variable of consciousness into that, and absolutely where they pointed out the pyramids. Russia at that time was doing that, and they were getting better energy pool from that.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So, that gets into the idea that certain shapes, why, organizations do that. The logo, that they use, and why they use so many logos that are the same is because your subconsciousness, as it co-creates within this time space, you're doing the work for them. Why reinvent the wheel with a shape or a pattern or something they don't know? It's all about that patterning that they talk about within the gateway, process.
Yeah,
So,
and
you
he's
know,
right here on page 16. He's got it like right the energy triangle, and he's got everything right there laid out. He's got all the formulas. He gives all the descriptions. He gives, it's like if you want to work it out for yourself, here you go.
I love it. I love it. And I just like the idea that we're not the only ones, challenging what is, dogmatic, popular opinion about science. These were really high-end, high-learned people a long time ago, seeing in front of them what was coming down the line. And I gotta ask you this, people who still preach sort of that reductivist materialism, do you think that's just out of ignorance, or do you think that that is something political, or what do you think?
I think it can be a little bit of both. Some people are probably so compartmentalized where they might not be aware of information such as this. And there could also be some kind of hidden agenda where, this kind of information is mainly kept quiet unless you really, really dig for it. Yeah,
Like you
yeah,
did.
and then, like I said, this document is pretty incredible because, like a lot of these topics, there's various books written on these topics about gravitational mass, energy, gravitational constants, speed of light, but there's never been a document that I've read that tries to tie all of those things together and then throw in consciousness on top of that, and then have the equations to try to make sense of it all. It's pretty incredible.
It is incredible. It really is. And I just and I'm in awe of this idea now that, you can click out and there's non-corporeal, meaning they don't have a body. There are beings out there, and they are outside of this frequency that we're all in, and they're there. And at the time, at least, I don't know if we've made a treaty with them or whatever, but this finally delves into the paranormal. It delves into UFOs. It delves into all of it. Because if you guys want to go back again, I know you're probably so tired of it, but I can't drive this home enough for new listeners and even other listeners that forget. It's page 26. And I'm sorry, I apologize. It's page 27, section J and section K. And it's sort of the rules of the road when you click out. And it says here, be intellectually prepared to react to possible encounters with intelligent non corporeal energy forms when time space boundaries are exceeded. And then it says for K, it says arrange to have groups of people in Focus 12 state unite their altered consciousnesses to build holographic patterns around sensitive areas to repulse possible unwanted out of body presences. So just K, right? J was mind blowing enough, but if you read K, it's already telling you by that point they were already talking about building processes to repulse these energy forms if they're hostile. So that goes back to the AI question that you and I were talking about earlier. Indeed, there can be this sort of ethereal machine built that's outside of time space in this, I would call it a superposition above space. This where we're at, this frequency, this
Yeah,
band.
because
And
the doctor is talking about consciousness as nothing more than a virtual energy.
absolutely. I love that he used that word too, because it does give the idea that virtual energy, he was one beat away from calling it like frequency or sound or cymatics or any of those things. He was just could you feel it? He was just a one beat away from that.
Yeah.
It was amazing. I love it. I love it. I love this kind of stuff, and it's really important. And we have a lot of people in the chat here. So you guys, if what were your impressions of the document? We're working on our last 10 minutes here. I try to keep it generally to an hour. Can I get some thumbs up? I see over almost 70 people watching, but there's, if I get some thumbs up, it'd be awesome. What was, if anybody out in the chat want to talk about, what were your takeaways? What are you thinking about? Yeah, shadow people, all of those things. I know that a lot of people, if you listen to some of the paranormal channels, they'll bring up the idea of some of these poltergeists or whatever language they want to use, shadow people, whatever. Oftentimes they may mention them in paramilitary outfits. And this could be them in a similar frequency, or they've clicked out and they're walking through, clicking out.
Hmm.
So let's see. Someone said they've quantum teleported here. Oh, Mandela Effect Comedy talked about that. Interesting. Said he was in a white room and sent back. Says you're
Wow.
not supposed to be here yet. So I think that these documents and just the bravery of writing these kinds of documents, I think we're really getting to a hub where you have the paranormal, you have the occult, you have hard science, you have data, you have AI, you have blockchain, you have all of these things, and they're starting to consistently harmonize. If I can kind of use, it's not really a pun, but it's pretty close for what we're talking about. But if they're almost harmonizing together now, and they're kind of coming through consistently, and
Yeah,
I
and
think
they're building on each other too. So, like the gateway document kind of laid the foundation, and the psychotronic document is kind of taking things a step further, which I think.
no doubt. And you know what I liked about the Psychotronic document too is it gave us almost a bit more. It filled in more of the history of what the DoD or the universities or DARPA and all these different organizations or the Japanese Psychotronic Institute. Basically, all these different worldwide global think tanks. What were they thinking at the time? 30 years ago. And again, we're 30 years back, but this stuff is out there. So if you're a good researcher like you are, Buster, we can get a hold of these things and ask these kinds of questions. And the reason why I don't consider these kinds of questions dangerous is because anything that can further advance your understanding of yourself and your reality and how you interact with it, especially if you're a Mandela affected person or you're someone who is experiencing Paris, I would consider the Mandela effect probably paranormal, but whatever. People can argue that, and I know they have before. But if you can understand that better, then it's a good thing for me, because anything that will help me sleep better and understand my world, I think is a good thing.
Yeah, and it might not be too far off to consider the fact that maybe the Mandela effect could be caused by consciousness.
Oh, totally. Well, that was my point about, and I'll bring it up again. I'm brave enough now to think about, now that I've thought it through, the flat Earth. Could you imagine if they changed just a minor, octave in the harmonic frequency of this reality by their will? And that's how the moon came into the atmosphere of Earth. Now, I know this sounds like science fiction, but you have if you juxtapose everything together perfectly, it's an argument worth listening to. You suddenly have the moon within the Earth's atmosphere, upending everything to where I don't even know where the Van Allen belts are anymore. And you have PBS, which wasn't an April Fool's joke, saying, well, technically man has never left Earth's atmosphere. Well, that was the argument that flat earthers have been saying the whole time. Now, now you take the gateway process where it talks about everything is consciousness. Everything is a hologram that springs forth from our consciousness. If you had enough of those consciousnesses, and they were, like I said, they're belligerent. Flat earthers are belligerent in their beliefs and they will not back down. And I don't mean that as an insult. I mean, they will not back down. They won't be told no. Can you imagine that they are actually changing the frequency of this existence through their unwillingness to cede any ground whatsoever? And if so, is that really they're truly exposing the nature of what real politics are, not politics like earthbound politics, regardless of what country you're in. You're talking about a major kind of next level 4D politics that we've only begun to understand.
Yeah, I mean, even in page 16, he's plainly saying it right here. He's going, the physical side of the world is an external system, and the consciousness side is an internal system. An interaction between the two can be considered, and this will probably lead to a great leap forward in modern physics where matter and energy are all.
Wow. So, and that's the Psychotronic document, right?
Yeah, that's right on page 16.
Right, right. So that's the Psychotronic document. So again, we are having complementary documents. Now that we finally have this lens called the Gateway Process CIA FOIA request, which is down in the description, everyone. It's there for you to read. Please read it. It will change your world. You'll feel better. I felt better. You'll feel better. I promise. If you're an ME, you'll certainly feel better. They never mention the Mandela effect, but one of the few demographic consistencies that I see with the Mandela effect is most MEs are pretty high IQ. So you'll see that it's self-evident why it will make you feel better if you're an ME. If you are someone who is from the paranormal world, if you're someone who is into being able to use what they call magic to change and impose your will on your immediate surroundings, so your reality conforms to your will, you absolutely are given kind of a leg up when you read this here, because it lets you know 35 years back they were understanding these things and they were saying, yeah, absolutely, absolutely, this is true, it's happening, it's real. And the reason why the CIA is not going to come after me, they're not going to come after you, you can click on the document, is because I like the way Chick said it. They're not in our state of mind. Our state of mind is simply trying to understand and to try to figure out and to feel better and to understand why apartment buildings are springing up and they weren't there the day before, or Montessori schools, they weren't there the day before, and it looks like it's been there for 30. Anyway, I'm getting on my own tangent. The point is, it we have a different objective than they have. And not to mention, we don't have the funding they have, we don't have the objective they have, and not to mention, we don't, I don't want to do anything that would be considered a threat. At least I don't think, not intentionally. I want to know why it's happening. I want to understand my world better. The CIA and the DoD want to dominate, and they want to dominate militarily, and they want to do it, I guess, in all realms actually. And
Hmm.
then, Amada, he too had that, but he too also had probably, I would imagine I don't know what his intentions were, and I'm not going to divine that here. I have some ideas, but I'm not going to do that here because that wouldn't be fair to him because I'm talking for him and that's just not fair. But
Right. And I think it's probably important to point out too, if someone's going to delve into this Psychotronics document, but they haven't read the Gateway document, I would suggest reading the Gateway document first.
no, 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 you're absolutely right. In fact, as we go along, and you've sent me more documents that I'm going to print out probably today. And as we build this together, Buster, this library, I think what we'll end up doing, and I probably shouldn't even talk about this on the fly, but anyway, we could probably have a suggested list like what you just did. Read this first, then read this, then read this, and then kind of bring in articles to cross reference what we're talking about to kind of strengthen the kind of machine we're building here.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said before, if anyone's skilled enough to kind of decipher these equations, absolutely, I'm sure either you or I would gladly like to hear from them.
Yeah, this is a call to anyone who wants to throw down we're asking for thumbs up. I mentioned, super chats and all, but this is a call. If you want to join in and you have a skill and you have time, and I understand that's what it is. And I understand everyone is super busy. So, I'm just happy you're here and you're listening. Okay. I'm happy for that. So if you can just listen and a thumbs up, that's fine. But if you have a skill, like reading and deciphering some of these formulas with these strange variables in there, please, and you have the time, reach out to us, myself, Buster, or Chick. We're on Twitter. Buster is around. I'm always around, and it might not be that day, but I will get back to you. And I will talk to you. So there you go. We're coming up on an hour here. I try to keep it at an hour. I only try to do that because I want people wanting more. But also too, Buster, I know sometimes I'll look at something that's 3 hours, and unless I really like that person and know who they are, I won't listen. It seems pretty daunting. So it has to be someone I really like when I start seeing like 2 hours or something. So, we're in the last 5-10 minutes here. What anything else?
I think that's pretty much it. This Psychotronics document, don't expect to kind of digest it. If you do delve into it, don't expect to get everything out of it in one sitting. I've read it probably 4 or 5 times now, and I'm still trying to decipher it. So it's fairly complex. Take it easy, take it slow, and enjoy it.
Yeah, and thank you, Baked and Awake. I do consider you reaching out. And Chris, where's Chick? She usually does the Saturday show with me, which is the Lost and Found bin. And that's but her and I we've done a midweek thing too. It's just that Buster and I we were just talking and about it, and he had the time, and I had the time, and it just kind of all it just came together just spontaneously is all. And I did the part 3 by myself with the gateway, and I just thought, you know, getting Buster's input for part 2 of this would be kind of important. And it's likely that I'm probably not going to do even a part 3 to the Psychotronic because everything is falling together so nicely. So that's really that's really it. And I'm looking over to the chat now. A couple people have called out to me. Mandela Effect Comedy said, SMQ, would you convert the doc to audiobook format and just do an upload when you're just reading the entire thing on air? Yeah, if I get the time, I could see doing that. Yeah, sure, I could see me reading that. Yeah. I don't know if it would be like this week or next week, but I could see me doing that. Sure. Raleigh says, but right after this, I will speak briefly when I first heard the name Mandela Effect. Thanks for live chat. Oh, okay. Yeah. Thank you, Raleigh. I appreciate that. Just people calling me out. Anybody called you out, Buster?
No, not that I can see.
All right. Let me see here. I'm just making sure if anybody called me out in the live chat here. All right. So I'm going to wrap it up. If you guys have any tips or anything else like that, let Buster, let Chick know. I'm on Twitter at underscore at AI underscore SMQ. Sorry. And hey, Buster, what's your handle actually?
My handle on Twitter is Buster1978CA.
Perfect. There you go. So if you don't have anything else, I think we have an hour here, and that's it.
I think I'm good.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, I'll be back on Saturday with Lost and Found Bin, 2 o'clock Eastern, normal time. Then I'll be back on Truth Frequency Radio, 5 o'clock, The Lizard Ritual. Come hang out. Check out Truth Frequency. They're really cool, and they got a lot of great people besides yours truly that are they're in their own field of study, and they're doing some really groundbreaking stuff. And some people like Kev Baker. I mean, some really heavy hitters they have on there. They got Crow on there, Crow 777. He's the guy he's the moon. He did the moon wave. He some real breakthrough people over there, so check him out. So anyway, I'll be signing off. See you guys later.
Bye.